высшие должностные лица ведущих стран НАТО.
Top officials in leading NATO countries have allowed themselves to make aggressive comments about our country. Therefore, I hereby order the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff to place the Russian Army Deterrence Force on combat alert.
Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his country's deterrence forces, which includes nuclear arms, to be placed on high alert, as we learned that Ukrainian and Russian delegations will meet for talks as soon as today. Here with me now to talk about all of this is the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg. Thank you so much for joining me. Russia and Ukraine are agreeing to hold talks without preconditions at the Ukrainian-Belarus border. Do you believe that this is a positive sign, sir?
I have absolute full confidence in President Zelensky and his judgment on whether it is right to sit down and try to find a political solution. NATO has supported a political solution all the way, and then it remains to be seen whether Russia is really willing to make some serious compromises and also to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine.
Vladimir Putin is ordering his country's deterrence forces, including nuclear weapons, on high alert in response to what he called aggressive comments from the West. How concerned are you about that?
The new statements from President Putin just add to the very aggressive rhetoric we have seen from Russia for many months, and especially over the last couple of weeks, where they are not only threatening Ukraine, but also threatening NATO-allied countries and demanding that we should remove all our forces from the eastern part of the alliance. So this is part of that, and it just highlights the importance of NATO allies standing together, North America and Europe standing together, and that's exactly what we are doing. And I would like to commend the United States for the leadership and also deployment of additional US forces to Europe.
I understand what you mean, that this is kind of just the latest in the moves and the rhetoric that Vladimir Putin is making. But when you hear about nuclear weapons or nuclear facilities, that brings it to a different level in the minds of a lot of people. How about you?
This is dangerous rhetoric. This is a behavior which is irresponsible. And of course, if you combine this rhetoric with what they are doing on the ground in Ukraine, waging war against the independent sovereign nation, conducting full-fledged invasion of Ukraine, this adds to the seriousness of the situation. And that's the reason why we both provide support to Ukraine, but also why we over the last weeks and months have significantly increased the presence of NATO in the eastern part of the alliance. US, but also European allies are now stepping up with more troops, more ships, more planes. And why we also have to realize that we are now faced with a new normal for our security. There will be some long-term consequences. And this is just the beginning of the adaptation that we need to do as response to a much more aggressive Russia.
I want to ask about that in 1 second, but Ukraine, I know you've heard, the world has heard, them begging for more help from Western countries. NATO announced Friday that it will provide additional weapons and air defense to Ukraine. When will it get there?
Allies are providing support as we speak, and we have actually, especially since 2014, since Russia illegally annexed Crimea, NATO allies have provided equipment, training. We helped them to modernize their command and control structure, their defense and security institutions. And this, of course, is extremely important now, because now Ukraine is attacked. And I commend the bravery and the courage of the Ukrainian defense forces, the Ukrainian people, and not least the Ukrainian President Zelensky. But the help that they have received over years is extremely important. We are stepping up with more air defense systems, with more anti-tank systems, ammunition, and we do that to help Ukraine to uphold its right for self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter.
President Zelensky of Ukraine is sharply criticizing European leaders for not allowing Ukraine into your organization, into NATO. Listen to what he said.
Я запитав сьогодні.
Today, I asked the 27 leaders of Europe whether Ukraine will be in NATO. I asked directly. Everyone is afraid, does not answer. And we are not afraid. We are not afraid of anything.
Ukraine applied for NATO membership back in 2008. It was never approved. So did NATO fail Ukraine?
This war is President Putin's responsibility. He is fully responsible for the war, for the attack on Ukraine. What NATO allies do is that we provide support to Ukraine, and we are stepping up as a result of the invasion. We tried to find a political solution. We warned against this for many months, and now we are both increasing support to Ukraine, but also increasing the protection and defense for all NATO allies.
No question that this is on Vladimir Putin. But if Ukraine were allowed into NATO, one of two things would have happened. Either if this attack happened, all of NATO would have responded under Article 5, or Ukraine being part of NATO would have been a deterrent to Russia, and Vladimir Putin would not have invaded in the first place. So the question stands, based on what President Zelensky said, should they have been allowed into NATO?
We have supported their efforts to move towards NATO membership to help them modernize the defense and security institutions, to meet the NATO standards, to fight corruption. But at the end of the day, we need consensus, 30 allies to agree. That's the way we make decisions in NATO. And our message to Russia is that it is for Ukraine to decide whether they aspire for membership, and it's for 30 allies to assess when and if Ukraine meets those standards. As long as Ukraine is not a member, they will remain a very highly valued and close partner, and a partner that we will continue to support. So regardless of what you may think about NATO membership, there is no excuse whatsoever for Russia to invade a peaceful, democratic country as Ukraine.
Right. Well, on that note, for the first time in history, you are activating NATO's response force and deploying additional military forces to its eastern flank near this region. Do these moves indicate that you think that Russia poses a real and potentially imminent threat to NATO members?
We don't see an imminent threat, but we see a much more aggressive Russia which is contesting core values for our security, willing to use force against Ukraine, but also threatening NATO allies. And that's exactly why we, over the last years, since actually 2014, have increased our presence, and over the last months have stepped up further with thousands of more troops, and also deploying parts or elements of the NATO response force for the first time in a collective defense mission. And this is something we do to remove any room for misunderstanding, miscalculation in Moscow about our readiness to protect and defend all allies. An attack on one ally will trigger a response from the whole alliance. And by doing that, we are preventing an attack. We are preserving peace. And that's the core purpose of NATO. And we've done that for more than 70 years, and we'll continue to do that also in the face of a new and more dangerous security reality in Europe.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.